Now, the creator of one of the UK's most successful TV comedies, Jennifer Saunders, says Absolutely Fabulous would never appear on our screens today because everything is so sensitive.
She says some comedians talk themselves out of telling jokes that might be controversial. Helen Keenan looks at how comedy has changed over the decades.
So is Jennifer Saunders right? Is the so-called woke culture killing comedy? We're now joined by Britain's Got Talent finalist Kojo who says today's world is ruining comedy.
Morning.
Hi, Kojo. Plus comedian and writer Paul Black, who says if you can't tell a joke without being offensive, then you're not funny.
And also joined by Adil Ray, creator of Citizen Khan, who we just saw in that report. I mean, you said a little bit earlier, welcome to you both, by the way, but you said a little bit earlier, you wondered whether Citizen Khan would be commissioned now. Could you make that same joke about immigrants?
You probably can't. And this was only, it'll be 10 years next year since the first episode. It ran for five years. Yeah, I don't think they'd commission it in that. And we are talking to BBC about doing a special. And I think there's going to be some conversations about what we can do.
Well, let's put that to Kojo Anim. Very good morning to you, Kojo. You think today's world and this wokeism is ruining comedy. But, for instance, you can't imagine, can you, that blackface would be still laughed at like it was in Little Britain, can you?
Of course not. And I think, you know, the world's progressed. And I think if we are to get into, like, comedy material, you know, I personally think that those situations happened. You know, we can't ignore things that have actually happened. Today, the world doesn't want to laugh at certain things anymore. So I think the onus is on comedians to not just kind of throw jokes out there without the knowledge. I think as comics, we were able to do that before, where we just had a shallow idea and we could just run with it and just see where the laughter went. But I think now comedians like Dave Chappelle aren't, you know, they're talking about controversial stuff still, but they're educated. And I think if you're going to talk about things, it's on the onus of the comedian to be educated. But I've always kind of felt like there's a victim to every joke.
That's interesting, because when you say comedians are now educated, I wonder whether that reflects what Jennifer Saunders says when she says, I think we would probably talk ourselves out of most of it now. Is she saying, are you agreeing with what she's saying in the sense that, you know, she now knows there are things you're supposed to be educated about which would stop her writing certain jokes?
Yeah, I do agree with her. And I also agree with the fact that, you know, certain things that were made back in the day were from a shallow perspective. They were kind of loosely funny. I think Ab now would still work, but I think it would even be better if there was education behind the material. Paul's a writer as well, so I'm sure he would have something to say.
Well, look, I mean, the thing is, Paul, there is this sort of rule in comedy that I've always been brought up with, that you can actually make a joke about absolutely anything, and that can be quite difficult at times and can be quite sensitive, but you can make a joke about absolutely anything if the intention is right. And if the intention is just to make people laugh, or I think in my case, it was a show of bringing communities together and universalising a disenfranchised community, then that is absolutely fine. And that's my intention, and I can't be concerned about what your perception is or how you receive my comedy. Otherwise, I'll never be able to write anything.
Well, I disagree to an extent, because if you're writing something that you know, targets a community that you're a part of, and the butt of the joke is to do with a community that you identify with, then that is fine. There isn't a problem with that, just like yourself. But I think the idea that we're kind of being restricted in the comedy we can make now just isn't true. There's so many people whose careers have been unaffected by being cancelled or any scandals relating to the use of blackface or transphobic or sexist jokes. It's not something that is ruining people's careers. And I'm a comedian that's at the start of my career, and I've never run into an obstacle with people being offended by my jokes. And that's why I said at the beginning that if you're unable to make a joke that doesn't rely on punching down and, you know, targeting marginalized communities, then maybe you're just not that funny.
Well, I think what Jennifer Saunders is making the point, you know, I don't think she's referring to anything that's homophobic or racist in Ab Fab, but it's more about the stereotype. You know, the characters in there played a certain stereotype of that time, of the 90s, you know, the it girls, the socialites. Now, I think what she's saying, that some people would be offended, that she would be portraying women in perhaps a negative way. But the thing is, I struggle to think of any comedy ever written, or anybody's stand-up routine that doesn't play with stereotype. And isn't that what we do? Isn't that what we do? We take a stereotype and we play with it, because that's what comedy is.
I think I grew up watching shows like Will McCoy, and that was, you know, predominantly stereotypes in our communities from the African Caribbean, Afro or Caribbean community. And those are the things that we could relate to, things that we grew up with in our households. I think now what's happening in people's households is actually going outside of the household, and people are being offended by it. And I, you know, there's a fine line, because why shouldn't I be able to tell my experience? Yeah. You know, my experience may offend many people, but if I've grown up with that experience, my comedy is supposed to be about my experience.
Okay, but Paul, can I just ask Paul, one of the elements of comedy is that you laugh at stuff that you're not supposed to laugh at. You know, that it's unexpected and it's a little bit risque. And sometimes that risks offending somebody. But I think, isn't Jennifer Saunders saying if you're considering everything and considering every possible offence, then you're not going to write anything that's going to be funny?
I think that there's no need to focus on... Of course, if you're thinking of every possible person you could offend, yes, you would write nothing, but... That doesn't mean you can't create comedy. And part of that statement, Jennifer Saunders did say that she hates small-mindedness and bigotry. So she's obviously not referring to being restricted in what she can write, which it has been kind of perpetuated that she wouldn't be able to make something nowadays. But whereas like the Ab Fab movie came out in 2016, like it's not stopped her career. And yeah, she's it's same with a lot of other people. They don't have the career restriction like I talked about. And if the point of your joke is to offend someone, then I do think it is maybe a weaker joke. Like what Kojo said.
It might not be your intention to offend somebody, but it might be your intention to be funny. Yeah. that's I tell you trouble, isn't it?
I had a strange journey with Citizen Calm. When it first happened, I was like shocked that people were offended. I was like, well, it's not really my fault that they're offended. By the end of it, I got to a point, I realised it was a good thing that they were offended, because and the Muslim community in particular, because what they realised was actually, initially they were offended by it. Years later, they came to me and said, oh, actually, we find it really funny now. We find it really funny. We sit down as a family and watch it. And sometimes you can be offended by something and realise, actually, why was I so offended?
Well, Kojo, Paul, thank you very much indeed. It's good to talk to you both this morning.